At this very moment, the person you lost is still conscious of you, not away in some faraway heaven, not vanished, not dissolved into nothingness. They are in the middle of something real, something urgent. And the fact that you clicked on this video tells me you already sense it, somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the silence they left behind. You feel it. They aren't finished yet. Edgar Cayce, a man who delivered more than 14,000 documented readings while in a deep trance, described what the soul goes through in the moments immediately after passing. Not in vague metaphors, but in precise, almost clinical detail. And he said something that changes everything. The first 72 hours after physical death are the most critical window any soul will ever pass through. What happens in those 3 days shapes where the soul travels next, how it heals, how it rises. And here is the part that will either shatter your heart or set it free, possibly both. What you do, what you feel, what you say to them during these hours, they receive it, all of it. If the person you love passed recently, this video is urgent. If they passed years ago, stay. Because understanding what they went through will change the weight you carry today. Let's walk through it together, slowly, carefully, because this isn't just information. It's a map of where they've been. Part 1, the moment of departure. It begins more quietly than you would expect. Not with light, not with trumpets, not with anything the movies trained you to imagine. It begins with a lifting, a heaviness that has been pressing on the body for hours, sometimes days, starts to dissolve slowly, layer by layer, like someone peeling a blanket from skin that has been cold for too long. And then there's a shift. Edgar Cayce described this across dozens of readings, and the message never wavered. The soul does not leave the body the way you pull a hand from a glove. It unfurls. It unfurls outward like warmth lifting from a just snuffed candle, still holding the shape of the flame, still glowing before it drifts away. And here is the first thing Cayce wanted the world to grasp. In this moment, the person you love is not confused. They are not afraid. They are more aware than they have ever been in their entire lifetime. Consider what that means. Every spiritual tradition paints dying as a crossing, a river, a door, a bridge. But Cayce didn't reach for those metaphors. He described it as waking up, as though the whole of physical life, every morning alarm, every argument, every embrace, had been a vivid, meaningful, important dream. And now the dreamer opens their real eyes for the very first time. But, and this matters profoundly, the experience of this moment is not identical for every soul. It depends on what they carry within them, their beliefs, their attachments, their fears, their capacity for love. All of it crosses over with them, every ounce. And if you're sitting there thinking, they died in pain, they died afraid, they died alone in a hospital room at 4 in the morning, and I wasn't there, I need you to hear this. Cayce said that the moment of separation is accompanied by a presence, not a human presence, something vaster, something that has been with the soul since before it was ever born. And in that instant, no matter the circumstances of the physical passing, no matter how sudden, how painful, how lonely it may have looked from the outside, the soul is met. They did not leave alone. They could not have left alone. That is not how this works. What appeared to be solitude from your side of the veil was something entirely different from theirs. Hold on to that. We're going deeper. Part 2. The first hours. So the body has been left behind. The soul is free. But here is what astonishes nearly everyone who first encounters Cayce's readings. They don't depart right away. In Clear's throat, the first hours after physical passing, the soul lingers. It remains near the body, near the room, near the people it loves, and it can perceive them with astonishing clarity. The newly released soul can witness the grief of those left behind. It can feel their suffering. And in many cases, as Cayce noted repeatedly, the soul desperately attempts to communicate, "I'm here, I'm okay, please hear me." But the living cannot hear it, not with their ears, not yet. This is one of the most heartbreaking details in all of Cayce's work, because the soul in those first hours is caught in an overlap. It exists in two states simultaneously, still tethered to the physical world by emotion, by habit, by love so powerful it acts like gravity, and yet already beginning to perceive the greater reality unfolding before it. Cayce likened this to the way a newborn exists within the birth canal, not fully in one world, not fully in the other, suspended between. And if you've ever lost someone, a parent, a partner, a child, a friend, what Cayce is telling us is that in those first raw hours of your grief, the person you lost was right there beside you. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Right there, hearing your words, feeling your tears, wanting nothing more than to assure you that the worst thing you fear, that they are simply gone, is not true. Now the soul is lingering. The silver cord still holds and the life review has not yet commenced. But something else is occurring in these early hours. Something Cayce documented that most people never hear about. The soul is trying to reach you, and sometimes it succeeds. Part 3. The signs, how souls reach through in the first 3 days. Cayce documented specific ways that souls communicate during this critical window. Not abstract energy, not wishful thinking, concrete physical phenomena that the living can perceive if they know what to look for. And throughout his readings and the case history surrounding them, certain patterns emerged again and again. The woman and the cardinal. There was a reading Cayce gave for a woman named Margaret, a widow only 48 hours into her grief. Her husband had died abruptly, a heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. She confided to Cayce that she had felt nothing since it happened. Total numbness, as though a wall had risen inside her. Cayce, while in trance, described something extraordinary. He said her husband's soul had been attempting to reach her since the moment of his passing, and the particular vessel he was using was a bird, a red bird that had been appearing at their kitchen window. Margaret went quiet. Then through tears, she said that a cardinal had been perched on the windowsill every morning since his death. She had noticed it. She had even thought it odd, but she had brushed it aside. Cayce's explanation was not merely that it was a sign, it went further. He said, the soul in its newly expanded state can influence living creatures, particularly birds, which exist at a vibrational frequency closer to the etheric plane. The cardinal wasn't a symbol, it was a channel. Her husband was using the only instrument available to him to say, I'm right here, turn around, look. The scent that had no source. Another case involved a young man who had lost his mother. 3 days after her passing, while sitting alone in her empty living room, he was suddenly surrounded by the fragrance of gardenias, his mother's perfume. There were no flowers in the house, no open windows, no explanation. In a later reading, Cayce explained that newly transitioned souls can at times project sensory impressions into the physical world, most often smell, because smell is the sense most directly tied to emotion and memory. The soul chooses the scent deliberately, not randomly. It picks the one thing the living person will recognize instantly, the one thing that will bypass the intellect and strike straight at the heart. The song at the impossible hour. A third account involved a father who had lost his teenage daughter in an accident. He recounted waking at precisely 3:17 in the morning, 3 days after her death, to the sound of her favorite song drifting from a radio in the hallway. A radio that had been unplugged for weeks. Cayce's framework explains this through the concept of etheric energy manipulation. Within the first 72 hours, the soul maintains enough of a tether to the physical plane to affect electrical systems, radios, lights, phones. Not because the soul is haunting anything, but because electromagnetic fields form the thinnest barrier between planes. The daughter wasn't attempting to terrify her father. She was using the only doorway available to her. And the song wasn't chosen at random. It was a message, not in the lyrics themselves, but in the very act of choosing it. The selection itself was the communication. I still know you. I still remember what we shared. I'm still your daughter. The temperatures shift. And finally, the simplest sign, and perhaps the most widespread. Cayce observed across numerous readings that a sudden, unexplained drop in temperature in a specific area, particularly near the body or in a room tied to the deceased, is among the most dependable signs of a soul's presence in those early days. Not a draft, not an open window, a cold that seems to emerge from nowhere and envelops you like a pocket of winter air. This isn't random atmospheric fluctuation, It's displacement. The etheric body of the soul, as it lingers between planes, pulls thermal energy from its immediate surroundings. You feel cold because they are there. So, if you've experienced any of this, if a bird appeared where it shouldn't have, if a scent filled a room for no reason, if a song played at an impossible hour, if the air around you suddenly turned cold in the days following someone's death, I need you to understand something. You were not imagining it. You were not desperate. You were not seeing what you wished to see. You were being reached deliberately and lovingly by someone who wanted you to know that the wall between you is thinner than you believe. And if you carry a story like this, if something occurred in those first days after losing someone that you've never shared with a soul because you feared being called crazy, I'm asking you right now to place it in the comments. Not for my sake, for the person who will scroll down, find your words and realize they aren't alone. Your story could be exactly what someone needs to read tonight. If you leave something heartfelt, I'll pin it so others can discover it. Now the soul has been hovering, reaching out, trying to be heard, but something far greater is about to unfold. Part 4, the etheric review, your life as a mirror. Now we arrive at what may be the most extraordinary stage of the first 3 days. Edgar Cayce described a process that many traditions have referenced, but few have articulated with the same precision. Some call it the life review. Others call it the panoramic vision. The label changes. The experience does not. Shortly after death, the soul begins to re-experience its entire life. Not as memory, not as a highlight reel, but as a reliving every moment, every decision, every interaction with another human being. But here is what makes Cayce's description breathtaking and completely unlike the watered-down version most people have heard. You don't merely see your life through your own eyes. You experience it through the eyes of everyone you ever touched. Let that settle in. That moment you snapped at a stranger in a grocery store. The soul feels what they felt. The sharp sting of being brushed aside, the small wound that lingered with them for the rest of the afternoon. That time you held a friend's hand through their darkest night. The soul feels that too. The rush of warmth, the overwhelming relief of not being alone. There is no judge in this process, no courtroom, no gavel, none is needed. Because when you feel the full weight of your own life, every ripple you sent into the world returns to you as direct experience. Judgment becomes unnecessary. Understanding comes of its own accord, and along with it, a feeling Cayce described over and over, a deep, wordless yearning to do better, to love more fully. Now this might sound terrifying. The thought of reliving every mistake, every harsh word, every selfish act. Who wouldn't fear that? But Cayce was insistent. The life review is not a punishment. It is a gift. It is how the soul teaches itself, integrating every lesson the life contained. And although the experience is intense, it unfolds within a presence of such overwhelming compassion that the soul never feels condemned. It feels understood. Picture the most loving person you've ever known, someone who could see you at your lowest and still recognize your worth. Multiply that by infinity. That's as close as words can bring us. Clears throat. The soul is now immersed in its review, seeing its life as it truly was. But the physical connection has not yet completely severed. Something ancient still holds on. Part 5, the silver cord and the point of no return. Ancient texts from many cultures describe what they call the silver cord, an energetic thread connecting the soul to the body throughout life. Some traditions say it extends from the crown of the head, others locate it at the navel or the heart. Cayce recognized this cord and said something remarkable about its role during the first 3 days. In the first hours, even throughout the first full day after physical passing, this cord remains intact. The soul is free, yes, but still tethered. This is precisely why the first 3 days are so sacred. The soul exists in a state of heightened sensitivity. It is both liberated and still linked. It can perceive the physical world with uncommon clarity. It can also begin to sense what lies beyond, dimensions of consciousness that most of us only glimpse in dreams, in meditation, in those rare moments of transcendence that take our breath away. But at some point within the first 3 days, the cord dissolves completely. And when it does, the soul crosses a threshold Cayce described as irreversible. Not frightening, irreversible in the way that birth is irreversible. You cannot return to the womb, and you would not want to. The dissolving of the cord coincides with a shift in awareness so profound that the soul stops perceiving the physical world as primary. The room, the body, the grieving faces, they fade. Not because the soul has forgotten, but because a new reality is revealing itself, one so vast, so vivid, that the physical world begins to seem like a dimly lit hallway the soul once walked through. The cord has broken. The review continues, and now the soul enters a space that Cayce spent more time describing than almost any other dimension of the afterlife. Part 6, the borderland between worlds. Cayce spoke extensively about what he called the borderland, a realm that isn't quite physical and isn't quite fully spiritual, the twilight of consciousness, the space between dreaming and waking. In this borderland, the soul encounters familiar things, places it recognizes, faces it loves, not because these things are physical, but because the soul draws them forth from its own memories, expectations, and inner state. This is why people who have near-passing experiences so often describe seeing deceased relatives, beautiful gardens, light-filled spaces that feel like home. These aren't hallucinations. They are real, but real in a way that transcends physical matter, fashioned from the raw material of consciousness itself. And here is what fascinates me about Cayce's description. He said, "The form the borderland takes depends entirely on the soul, a soul filled with love, with genuine spiritual seeking. That soul enters a borderland of extraordinary beauty. It is met by guides, by loved ones, by presences radiating warmth. A soul consumed by fear, by guilt, by attachment to material things. That soul moves through the borderland differently, not as punishment, but as reflection. The borderland mirrors whatever the soul brings with it. Bring rage and you meet storm. Bring unresolved grief and you find yourself in a muted gray stillness, not hellish but waiting, as though the soul must work through what it holds before it can move on. Bring love, real, unguarded love, and the borderland opens like sunrise. This is one of the most profound implications of everything Cayce taught. The afterlife is not something that happens to you, it happens through you. Your inner world becomes your outer world. The mask falls. The pretense dissolves. Whatever you truly are, the beautiful and the broken, is laid bare. There is nowhere left to hide. And that, Cayce said, is exactly the point. The borderland has revealed the soul's true inner landscape. And now the process of release begins, the part that determines what comes next. I want to pause here and speak directly to you as you listen. Is there a moment from your own life that rises up? Something you did or didn't do that you've carried quietly for years? Something you turn over at 2 in the morning when the house is silent? Because according to everything Cayce documented, it matters. All of it, every moment. Even the ones you think no one noticed. If this is touching something inside you, even something you can't yet put into words, I'd be grateful if you'd hit subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but for the person who will stumble onto this channel 6 months from now in the middle of the night, searching for a reason to believe that passing is not the end. Your subscription pushes this toward them. You may never meet them, but you will have changed their night. That's how this works. Let's continue. Part 7, the second day, deepening and release. As the soul moves into the second day, something remarkable begins. The emotional intensity of the life review softens. Not because the soul forgets, it never forgets, but understanding begins to replace raw feeling. It's similar to what happens when you finally process a grief you've been carrying. There's a period of searing pain, and then slowly something shifts. The pain doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes wisdom, it becomes knowing. Cayce described this phase as a time of release. The soul begins to let go of its attachments to the physical world, not with conflict, not with sorrow, but with a kind of tender acceptance. Picture holding a handful of sand. You've been clutching it your entire life. Your possessions, your identity, your routines, your body, your name. And now, finger by finger, the hand opens. The sand doesn't fall. It drifts, returns to the earth. and your hand feels lighter than it ever has. That is the second day. But Cayce also observed that this phase can be deeply challenging for souls intensely attached to the material world. Souls who built their entire identity around wealth, appearance, status, or sensory pleasure may struggle here, not as punishment, but because releasing what defined you is hard, even when what awaits is infinitely greater. And this leads us to something Cayce said that may be the most liberating idea in this entire video. Many of you carry guilt about how your loved one lived. Perhaps they struggled. Perhaps they were angry or bitter or afraid. Perhaps their final years weren't peaceful. And you wonder if the afterlife mirrors the soul's inner state, then what does that mean for them? Here is what Cayce said, and he said it with more certainty than almost anything else in his readings. Struggle in life does not condemn the soul. Struggle is how the soul learns. A life filled with difficulty, with pain, even with mistakes. That life is not a failure. It is a curriculum. And the soul, once freed from the body, sees the curriculum for what it truly was. The bitterness falls away. The anger dissolves, because the soul finally understands why. Your loved one's hard life was not a tragedy. It was preparation, and the release taking place on the second day is proving that to them right now. This is why Cayce counseled the living to begin practicing non-attachment now. Not because material things are evil, but because clinging creates weight the soul carries across the threshold. The lighter you are when you cross, the higher you can rise. The soul is letting go, becoming lighter. And on the third day, it reaches the threshold that determines everything. Part 8. The third day, the soul finds its level. The third day, the culmination, the moment Cayce described as perhaps the most significant in the entire post-passing journey. The silver cord has fully dissolved. The life review has completed its deepest work. The borderland has been crossed. And now the soul, fully freed, fully awake, moves toward what Cayce called its level. This is not heaven and hell, not a binary. It's a spectrum. Cayce described the afterlife as a realm of many dimensions, many planes of existence, each vibrating at a different frequency. And the soul, upon completing its 3-day transition, naturally gravitates toward the plane that matches its own. A soul rich in compassion, in seeking, in love. That soul rises to a plane of extraordinary light and creative power. A place where learning continues, where relationships deepen, where the soul begins to comprehend its true nature within the architecture of creation. A soul weighed down by cruelty, by willful harm, by persistent refusal to grow. That soul descends to a lower plane, not punishment, resonance. You go where you vibrate. You experience what you are. And here is what makes Cayce's vision so much more hopeful than the rigid frameworks of eternal damnation. No soul remains in a lower plane forever. Growth is always possible. Even in the darkest corner of the afterlife, there are guides, there are helpers, there are paths upward. Because in Cayce's cosmology, the entire universe operates on one fundamental principle. You are destined to return to the source, to the divine, to the boundless creative intelligence from which you originated. And nothing, not your gravest failures, not even death itself, can permanently bar that return. The soul has arrived at its proper level, but its work is not disconnected from yours. The bond between the living and the departed is not broken, it is transformed. And here is where the teaching circles back to you. Part 9. Why 3 days? The sacred pattern. Before we reach the conclusion, there is one more layer I wish to unfold, because the number 3 did not emerge from nowhere. 3 days. Consider how frequently this number surfaces across the spiritual traditions of the world. In Christianity, the central event of the faith, the resurrection, takes place on the third day. For 3 days, the body rests in the tomb, and on the third day, transformation. In ancient Egyptian belief, the soul undergoes a 3-day process of judgment and purification in the underworld before entering the realm of Osiris. Now, in Tibetan Buddhist practice, the Bardo, the Book of the Dead, describes a transitional period immediately following passing, during which consciousness moves between states. The first phase, the most disorienting and luminous, lasts roughly 3 days. In Jewish tradition, mourners observe a period of intense grief for the first 3 days, during which the soul is believed to linger near the body. And across the indigenous traditions of countless cultures, from Australian Aboriginal practice to various Native American nations, there are rituals specifically crafted to guide the soul throughout its first 3 days after departure. Cayce did not view these parallels as coincidence. He regarded them as confirmation, as though humanity, across all its divisions of language, culture, and geography, had independently been uncovering the same truth for millennia. 3 days. That is how long the crossing takes. That is how long the soul needs to fully release the physical and open itself to the infinite. The fact that so many traditions independently arrived at this same number from opposite corners of the world reveals something that transcends any single reading or any single teacher. It tells us this knowledge is woven into us, stitched into the very fabric of what we are. Somewhere beneath our thoughts, beneath our doubts, beneath the noise of daily survival, we know what happens. We have always known. We have simply forgotten. And perhaps that's the true purpose of moments like this. Not to teach you something new, but to remind you of something ancient that you carry in every cell, waiting patiently for the moment you're ready to remember. Every tradition on earth confirms this same window, and that universal agreement points to a subject Cayce returned to more often than any other. The bond between the living and the dead does not end with passing. It is the living who must learn how to carry it.